Bí an réilge an teanga a bhí réiminéirin de bhór a chuid stair na tíre. Ó lár na chéad bhíléise é dí a rá, tá teanga tafada I scríbnareacht, mar hamplar chlocha I script chor a dúchtar óam irthi. Thos I tradiisiún sair scríb na géilge leis an abití róhhanach san 8ú agus san 9ú céad áfach. Feitir an ionisise héagsúil is luathe I lámh scríbhine a bharan I leabharlanna ar mhórrainn na Thorpa. Is nótaí agus tráchta na garaide I lámh scríbhine ladine iad, a dúchtar gluiseanna orthu, agus is scrífa I línte na deachsanna ladine atá siad. Throughout its history, Old Irish has been changing all of the time, like any natural language. And we can see that very clearly. We can see very clear differences in the usage of the language and in aspects of the grammar between Old Irish, which is 8th and 9th centuries, and Middle Irish, that is 10th to 12th centuries. But what we would really want to be able to is to pin down much more narrowly, within a few decades, when the major linguistic changes actually took place. Since 2015, the ERC-funded project Chronologicon Hibernicum has been doing research on the internal variation and linguistic diversity of early Irish, under principal investigator Professor David Stifter from Maynooth University in Ireland. It is a fundamental challenge of Irish literature that for most part of the early medieval period, it has been transmitted anonymously and without what we would call nowadays timestamps. So unless a text makes reference to a historical event, and the texts very rarely do that, we have no way of getting an external date for the texts. So it's actually the linguistic changes within the texts themselves that are our major indicators of whether a text is early or late. And of course, that's only relative, and it does not give us any absolute dates. Our challenge in Chronologicon Hibernicum is now to develop methods to extrapolate from the few dated texts what linguistic variation had already occurred at that particular time, or which kind of variation was becoming dominant at that time. From that information, we want to build a chronological sequence. And when such a rough framework has been first established, we can then use that information and narrow down ever closer to more and more absolute dates. In a second step, these dates can then be used to infer dates for anonymous literary texts. To allow fine-grained statistical investigations, the Chronib team has created the deeply annotated lexical database Corpus Paleohibernicum, Corpus of Old Irish, or CORF for short.
CORF incorporates a number of pre-existing databases, plus a large number of texts that we have added in the project. In total, we have included almost 80 texts. Most of them come from the Old Irish period, but they also reach into Middle Irish. So far, the emphasis has been on glosses, but that's just the nature of the sources. We have also annotated some literary texts, and the most important annals from the mid-6th to the mid-10th century. The annals are especially important because the entries in them were written year after year after year, and therefore they reflect linguistic changes very directly. In the future, we hope that more narrative literature can be added. The medieval Irish tradition is famous for its heroic sagas, for example.
Corpus Paleohibernicum is to date the largest lexical and textual corpus in early Irish studies. What makes it unique, compared to other ancient and medieval languages, is that in addition to the deep annotation of commonly studied information, such as part of speech, morphology, and syntactical behavior, the Chronib team has developed a way of annotating the tokens for diachronic variation and change. We have so far identified over 300 types of synchronic variation that are reflected in our sources, and this includes phonological variation, morphological, syntactical variation, and also orthographical variation.
Every change or variation has a specific code which is tagged in the database. You have to keep in mind that apart from the variation tags, each item in the database is also tagged for dozens of other pieces of information. This creates an enormously rich set of linguistic data. The search function of Corf allows users to query for any tag in combination with any other piece of information annotated in a database. This makes it possible to determine very precisely the context in which variation occurs.
Traditional statistical methods would fail to lead to significant results with the small databases available for early Irish, and with a large number of unknown variables such as time and place. Using Bayesian statistical models, it is possible to take uncertainties and educated guesses of experts into the equation, and to arrive at probabilistic chronologies for the linguistic changes. We can take a very simple problem. For instance, the merger of unstressed O and A in Old Irish. We know that originally these two sounds at the end of words were separate vowels, but over the course of the Old Irish period, they both merged in A. And we've classified this change as PH28. That's the tag for the change. PH stands for phonology and 28 is the 28th change. PH28.1 means that final O is still retained as such. PH28.2 means that the change to A had already taken place. And we have over 1,400 examples for the change in our database. When we feed this into our Bayesian models, we get a graph, and a graph that tells us about the probability of O becoming A at a specific time. Here you can see that the range of probabilities at the beginning, which is around 600 AD, is very wide. And this is actually due to the fact that we have very little data for that time. Therefore, there's a lot of uncertainty involved. Here, around the year 800, the amount of data increases, and therefore the certainty increases also. And this is reflected by the much narrower range in the probability. When we're finished with the tagging, we can then create graphs like this for all of the synchronic variation of early Irish. And in their entirety, they give us a comprehensive probabilistic picture of the linguistic diversity of early Irish. The study of early Irish is a very international discipline. Researchers from 9 different countries have contributed to the project. Because of its phonological, morphological, and syntactic complexity, early Irish is of interest to linguistic theory in general. The computational and statistical methods developed in Chronologicon Hibernicum can serve as a model how to research other ancient and medieval languages of limited documentation, and they can raise the appreciation of linguistic diversity in the historical dimension.